Fire and Blood is a book that I would describe as broadly okay. This is a book that's hard to really judge by the same criteria as I would normally judge a novel because, well, it's not really a novel. It's a history book. This is written as an in-universe text written by a maester about the history of the Targaryen Dynasty. So this doesn't really qualify as a prequel or a spin-off. I'd class it more as supplementary material, kind of something on the level of like The World of Ice and Fire. Now, the similarities between these two books don't just stop at the cover art. About half of this book is devoted to the history of Westeros, and that of course does include a large section on the Targaryen dynasty. That's not to say that the contents are identical, of course. This is after all a 700-page novel covering only the first half of the Targaryen history. So, events that in The World of Ice and Fire might be covered in one paragraph, here would get a whole chapter. So while most of the events being covered here aren't exactly new information, there is a lot more detail to be found here. And for me at least, it's almost all new, because when it came to the World of Ice and Fire book, I never really read the Targaryen sections. I read the section about Aegon's conquest and the stuff immediately following that, but I never really went any further. Because, for me really, the Targaryens aren't exactly the most interesting part of the world or this history. Really, I've always been the most interested in the stuff that we know the least about. The ancient history, the legends, such as the Long Night. And in terms of the world, I'm most interested in like the mysterious, distant, far-flung reaches that the people of Westeros know very little about. So suffice to say, I wasn't exactly hugely invested going into this. While it was generally fine, I was never exactly bored while reading it. But now, since finishing it and thinking back, there are a few moments that stand out, but the rest just kind of blurs together and I can't really remember very much. Like, take Jaehaerys I, for example. His reign covers about 50 odd years and takes up quite a large section of this book. But thinking back on it, I can only really remember select events from that time, and most of what happened in between is just bleh. Other sections are kind of glossed over quite quickly. For example, Viserys I, whose reign was about 20-something years, goes by quite quickly because not a whole lot particularly important happens during the reign itself. The book is more really focused on just setting up the events that are going to come after he dies. But again, there are some sections that are really good and do stand out. So some of the most significant events covered in this book are Aegon's conquest, the reign of Maegor the Cruel, and finally the Dance of Dragons. These are definitely the strongest sections of the book, and these definitely feel very similar to the brutal and horrible events as seen in the main series, but in a bit more condensed form. But then, as a result of the way this is presented, you don't really get to know any of these people as characters exactly. They're more just historical persons. You only really know them through the actions that they had. The Dance of Dragons itself is a good example of a huge, bloody conflict that was ultimately pointless. Now, that's not a criticism. I think this is reiterating a theme that George Martin has definitely put in the main series as well, that war is bad and ultimately it doesn't achieve anything. By the end of the Dance of Dragons, everyone loses, really. There are thousands dead. Both the people who claim the throne have died, along with most of their children. And of the one son and one daughter left from each, they both get married and ascend to the throne. So really, what was the point? It probably wouldn't have been a good point to end the book there, but instead it decided to add on just another little kind of boring section following the first few years of the reign of Aegon III while he was still a child. That's not to say it's completely boring. You still have to deal with the cleanup following the Dance of Dragons. There's the usual plotting and scheming going on in the background with various minor characters. And then it does kind of reach a climax where all the various conspirators are rounded up and killed in one scene. There's a couple scenes like that throughout the book, and every time it happens, I was always like reminded of the end of The Godfather, where Michael is at a baptism and it's intercut with scenes of all the various crime rivals being killed. And so every time that happened in the book, you know, you'd see one guy get pushed off the bridge into a moat of spikes. You see one guy get stabbed, one guy get drowned. They're always different, and it's always, you know, cut together, almost being checked off one by one as they're killed. Also, I think there is at least one person in this book who gets garroted. But anyway, after all that's wrapped up, a couple more weeks or months pass up until the point where Aegon III comes of age and is able to become king proper without any regents or council looking over him. And then the book just kind of stops there. I know it's a 2-volume history and you have to split it in half somewhere, but the way the last chapter ends, it feels just like any other chapter. You expect the story to continue on the next page, but it just doesn't. One other thing I'd like to mention, not really because it's a substantive point about quality or anything, I just found it funny. Obviously, because we're filling in a lot of historical details, there's a lot of new characters appearing, and a lot of them need to have names. And I feel like at a certain point while writing, George Martin just got to a point where he said, fuck it, let's just have fun with them. So at one point in the book, you're introduced to a character called Elmo Tully, who is eventually succeeded by his son Kermit Tully. Now, at one point, it's pointed out that Kermit is young and has not seen many battles. Now, obviously in this world, a term used to describe someone like that is being green. Which, again, makes sense in universe, but come on, Kermit? Green? Also, he has a brother called Oscar who is also described as being even more green. So then from that point on, anytime that guy was mentioned, I literally just imagined Kermit the Frog in a suit of armor, and that just made every scene he was in much funnier. Again, this literally doesn't affect the quality of the book at all, I just found it funny. But at the end of the day, this really does what it says on the tin. It is a history book. So if you're really interested in the history of this world, go for it. If not, you can probably give it a miss.